Hello and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast. I'm Richard Sverrisson, Editor-in-Chief Europe at Montel, and today we're in Paris at our French Energy Day. The topics up for discussion are renewables, what France is doing to expand its green energy, but also we're looking at the nuclear and the place it has in the French energy mix and nuclear safety issues. Today is my great pleasure to be joined by Yara Chakhtoura, Managing Director at Vattenfall subsidiary Vattenfall Eolien. Yara, welcome to the Montel podcast. We're at the Montel Energy Day, and we've heard a lot about France's ambitious plans to expand its renewable capacity. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and how confident are you that these targets can be met?
Well, thank you for having me first. Just one word about Vattenfall. So Vattenfall is one of the leading energy provider in Europe, and we've been in France since 18 years now as supplier of electricity and gas, first for businesses and since late 2018 for customers as well. So France indeed has set an ambitious multi-annual energy plan for the next 5 years up until 2028, which we salute in the sense that it does meet the 40% renewable electricity in the energy mix that France is targeting. Now, one dark point we see in this multi-annual energy plan at the moment is the lack of ambition when it comes to offshore wind targets.
Sure.
So from our perspective, offshore wind has proven that it is a competitive and a job-creating industry. So on the one hand, if we talk about competitiveness, we, for instance, at Vattenfall have proven that competitiveness through several of our projects. In 2016, we won the first project that was under 50 euro per megawatt hour, Danish Kriegslag in Denmark, and we've taken investment decision for this project late 2018. So we're proving that it is feasible.
Absolutely. Vattenfall is a very big player in offshore wind. You've committed yourself to be carbon-free within a generation. But why is France lagging behind here? What are the reasons?
Well, first, the first project that were launched in 2012 and 2014 were the very first project in France. And France has a huge potential when it comes to offshore wind, considering their sea facade and as well as the wind conditions here. Now, the first project were in a regulatory framework that were not specifically adjusted to the development of offshore wind and those very long projects. So once you won, you couldn't actually change or easily change the technical description of your project. Otherwise, you had to update your permits, and then you could again and again be subject to recourses and legal challenges, which drags along and keeps on dragging on the projects.
Sounds very inflexible.
It was. Now, the government has made lots of simplifications over the past years. In particular, late last year, in 2018, they passed what we call the Loi ESSOC, so a simplification law, which enables now to set up a permit envelope exactly as we are experiencing in the UK. So you can, with that process, you can choose the final technology when the project is mature enough to do that, and you will choose the best technology for the development of the site, both from an environmental standpoint, both from a competitive standpoint, so that you have the best projects in the time.
So I think there's a little bit of discussion today about PPAs, and that's a big part of Vattenfall. It's certainly a part of Vattenfall's business in the Nordics, particularly in the Netherlands and the UK. How about France? Why are things not moving so fast here in terms of PPAs?
Well, in general, as the development of renewable energy continues, the need for support mechanism decreases progressively, or the extent of that support decreases. Now it's still a bit too soon to get out of that support mechanism. Otherwise, we'll be sending a wrong signal to the market, as we need to accompany the stabilization of that renewable market.
You don't want to make retrospective changes to subsidies.
Exactly. So, as of today, CFD mechanisms is a very good revenue stabilization mechanism that should continue to accompany that stabilization. And corporate PPA is a complementary mechanism that provide that revenue stabilization for renewable projects. Now, it is developed, as you said, in the Nordics and the UK and Netherlands, but that goes also without hard constraints on signing those PPA, especially having access to the full guarantees of origins of the projects. In France, we're still, and in Europe overall, we're still in an emerging market. In France, you can't actually have access to a guarantee of origin as long as you are in a market premium environment. So as the project get out progressively of those subsidy markets, then the market should definitely develop. And we see initiatives starting right now. The burgeoning market, it will take a bit longer to develop here.
It's at an early stage.
It's a very early stage, yeah.
Then if we talk a little bit about the hydro concessions, I know Vattenfall's name actually means water falling. So how the French hydro concessions, how is that developing in France? There was supposed to be potentially a decision by the end of the year. I know you're more involved with the wind side, but if you could say anything about on what's happening in France with the hydro concessions?
Well, for now, as you may already know, we were obviously part of that adventure in 2010 when the French government initially intended to open the concessions. At the moment, we will just wait and see when the government will decide to make the move, and we will decide accordingly.
France is a country very much dominated by nuclear power. Are there any sort of barriers from that side in terms of boosting renewables? I mean, are there any? Does that the dependence on nuclear, does that prevent the country from potentially, building more offshore or onshore wind? How do you see it?
Overall, the French government has sent a consistent signal, which was developing the renewable base over the years, balancing it out with obviously the overall budget to support that development. But consistently now with that new multi-annual energy plant, we are targeting that 40% electricity from renewable sources by 2030, which is an excellent news. And the government is going to update its energy policy to show we will reach 50% nuclear, down from 80% in 2035. So there is an equilibrium that is changing in that direction of developing the renewable market. The big question that we cannot answer today and that the president has asked to the industry to reflect on is what will happen next. And we're looking forward to knowing more, and at the moment we actually cannot say, but what will happen after that 50%.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Yara, for joining us on the Montel podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the next part of the pod from the French Energy Day here in Paris. It's my pleasure to have with me here Chris Eales, my colleague from Montel, Jean-Christophe Niel from the IRSN, which, if I'm correct, is the technical arm that advises the French safety authority, to have that absolutely correct, and Yves Marignac from WISE Paris. Jean-Christophe, by saying, what is your role? Can you explain a little bit about the work that you do in France?
So IRSN is a public organization assessing the nuclear risk. So it means at the same time performing research to understand more precise disease risk and giving advice based on technical opinion and expertise work to the safety authorities which have to decide.
So you're performing a very key role in ensuring that French nuclear plants are safe.
Nuclear safety is technically and scientifically based, and IRSN is providing technical and scientific advice on the project of the industry to give advice to the safety authority.
And so we can be fairly sure that French nuclear plants are very safe?
If IRSN had any point showing that it is not safe, we would say it to the Nuclear Safety Authority, and we would say it publicly.
Which you have done on several occasions, and quite recently you had an announcement on Tricastin, is that correct? Could you talk us a little bit about your role there?
Last year, at the end of 2017, IRSN identified weaknesses in the dike surrounding the Tricastin plant, and we recommended to the French Nuclear Safety that the plant be stopped and the dike comforted to deal with the safety risk.
And that has now been resolved. That's perfectly
following this, ISN has requested EDF to stop the reactor and to comfort the dike, which has been done then.
To round off, because I know you're a very busy man and you have to be somewhere else, what are the current issues that you are looking at? Some of the technical issues in the French nuclear fleet?
So the major issue we are working on at the present time is the licensing of EPR, the new Generation 3 reactor built by EDF in Flamanville. And we are also involved in the assessment on the conditions to allow the continuing operation of 900 megawatt reactors. We are also involved in the issues connected with waste management.
Jean-Christophe had to leave us, Yves, but thankfully you're here to sort of explain your position. How would you react to that and the discussion today in the French Energy Day?
Well, I think first of all, I mean, there's a technical analysis done by institutional players like IRSN, who have a lot of manwork to put in that kind of thing. Our position at WISE Paris is much more modest. We are, trying to identify critical issues, and develop some analysis to challenge the institutional one on this. And my concern is less with the kind of technical assessment that IRSN could provide in the system today than, on one hand, with the loss of capacity of the operators to deliver on safety requirements and quality requirements, and on the other hand, regarding the loss of capacity of the safety authority to impose on operators to respect those requirements in due time.
So you don't think they have the teeth? But that's ASN, really? There's a lack of power to enforce safety standards?
I mean, what we are seeing is an increasing number of issues with non-compliance, quality of fabrication, loss of maintenance, delays in starting some works, in completing others, and that's partly because the operators are not behaving up to the kind of requirements and the level of responsibility that is there, and partly because ASN seems to lack the means, the power to impose a better behavior on the operators.
So the ASN is the safety authority, and IRSN, who we've just spoken to, they are just the technical
support
arm.
organization.
So could you give some examples of this, Yves?
Well, a very recent and significant example is the delay in completing the so-called ultimate emergency diesel generators that ASN required EDF to install on each of its 58 reactors before the end of 2018. The system found out, coming close to that deadline, that the generators would not be in place, and ASN had no other option than accepting for EDF's demand to postpone installing those generators by 2 years. It's not a direct threat in the sense that if we don't face the kind of very severe seismic situation, for instance, that would require those emergency systems to be there. I mean, if we don't face that, there's no worries. But if that situation is happening, and since Fukushima, it's a requirement that the plants are equipped to face that kind of situation.
So this has been pushed.
So it's 2 years delay in upgrading the plants up to that kind of requirement.
So So it's a delay of 2 years. They sort of, because they weren't able to complete on time, and that's been accepted by the safety authority.
Yeah, that's been accepted. The point is that everyone could see that coming, and there was no kind of backup in the system to prevent this situation from happening. And that is just one example. The problem is that we have tens and even hundreds of situations of that kind, not all of the same importance or as emblematic as the one with those diesel generators, but on almost any commitment that the operators would make to the authorities to develop studies or implement works by a certain deadline. Almost in every case, we found ourselves with delays and the authority being kind of forced to accept that.
And Chris, do you think that, I mean, we talked a little bit today about potential for, the minister said today, she's not the minister, but she's the head of the energy department at the French government. She talked about they were very confident. Virginie Schwartz, she said they were very confident that they would be able to close these reactors and that they'd be...
and crucially extend all the others, because as you pointed out, Yves, it's about extending 44 reactors.
Yeah, well,
to an average age of 50.
The real point is whether the industry can face the challenge of extending the lifetime of so many reactors while upgrading their safety level up to the objective that IRSN has set, which is coming as close as possible to the safety levels of a new evolutionary reactor like EPR. So that's a big challenge. And my analysis of the situation is that is actually not possible considering the level of capacities, industrial and financial capacities of the industry. So there's a huge risk that we find ourselves with a situation where safety is challenged on one hand and profitability of extension, of life extension is challenged on the other end. And of course, those objectives might be contradictory. So there's a huge risk for the industry and the society ahead of us. And my feeling is that EDF is fuite en avant. I don't know the English word for that. Like, pursuing... there's no other way than life extension, starting new projects. The only escape is there. And
they're also building. To be fair, they're building renewables, aren't they? They're building wind parks, and then they're involved in that. They have a whole.
But they can't do everything at the same time. The economic pressure is enormous, and I really think we're going ahead of a situation where the industry can't cope anymore. Very, very strong decisions and changes might be needed in the future.
How do you mean it can't
cope with that?
The industry can't cope anymore. I mean, what's the consequence of that?
Well, the consequence might be both on the level of safety, because the industrial and financial capacity is not there to deliver to the required level on one hand, and on the economics of the electric system and the financial situation of EDF on the other end. It's likely to be a mix of those two problems. And I think that the current situation where everyone pretends to believe that it could go on for 1 or 2 decades without any big change, it's clearly a huge illusion. And we're going to come in the coming years to real hard challenges and stronger decisions to be needed.
And are you confident that the government and the board of directors at EDF is capable of making those tough decisions?
It's a kind of matter of preferences between short-term interest, which is of trying not to change anything, and long-term life threat. EDF, its whole industrial strategy and the whole governance system around it need to change dramatically to survive the next decades. But the pressure for not changing anything in the short term is actually dominating on this need for a deeper change.
The push for profitability, etc., etc. So what's the outlook then? What does this mean for renewables in France? And we talked a little bit, and I talked to sort of people earlier that in this pod about that. So what's the outlook there, especially for wind and solar? I mean, France has a huge coastline. It's very sunny in the south.
The potential is enormous. The desire of many players is strong. It's a huge opportunity for the French industry if it would jump on these new markets instead of sticking to the old one of the nuclear industry. The concern is that if we stick to the current strategy, which is pretending that we can keep much of the nuclear fleet in place while developing renewables, I mean, we come to a conflicting situation in economic terms, because that leads to oversizing of the French electric system, and that is going to cost. So the risk is that we keep nuclear with potential issues with safety and profitability, but at the same time, without developing renewables as much as we commit to, because there's no room for them.
Exactly. Either economically or in the system. Or,
no room from an economic and institutional perspective.
Yves Marignac, some would say, because you're sort of an anti-nuclear campaigner, that you would be very, very critical of this. So you're bound to say this.
Well, I'm really denying being an anti-nuclear campaigner. I mean, that's really not my point. I mean, turn to people at Greenpeace or Réseau Sortir du Nucléaire, and you will
How
see.
How are you different? How are you different?
You will see that they have. And they develop very different positions from mine on some critical issues.
So it's too simplistic to say that you're anti-nuclear.
And it's, I mean, and not me, but Wise Paris is really trying to develop critical analysis, which is an expertise. And I mean, you don't provide good expertise if you start with an a priori which is pro or anti. I mean, we develop critical expertise, and yes, it's our role to challenge the institutional expertise. So, I mean, it would be pointless for us to develop the same kind of view and the same kind of analysis that the operators or the industry, the technical support organization or the authorities. So we are there to challenge their views, but based on the same requirements that apply to any kind of expertise. Coming back to facts, explaining our analysis, assumptions, conclusions, and the whole reasoning behind it, so that it could be argued. That's what we're here for. And I mean, I think it's a really important role considering the current situation that some players develop this kind of challenging analysis to the system. I think desperately needs it.
It needs an independent, unbiased analyst such as yourself. Yves. Yves, thank you very much for joining the Montel pod today.
Thank you for inviting us today.
Thank you for listening to the Montel Weekly Podcast. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, and on the Montel website. Keep up to date with all the latest news on Montel News and follow us on Twitter. Goodbye.